Okay, well, I will start off the session by welcoming everyone here today to our virtual AAA book launch of Black Food Matters, Racial Justice in the Wake of Food Justice, which was released just last month, October 2020, with University of Minnesota Press. I really want to thank you all for being here specifically today during this time when we just found out that Joe Biden has been projected to be the next president of the United States. And we have this historic moment where Kamala Harris has become the first woman of color, the first Black woman to be vice president of the United States. So I know there are a lot of competing things for your attention right now. My name is Hannah Garth. I use she, her pronouns. My visual description is that I have brown skin, blackish brown, mid-length curly hair, brown eyes. I'm wearing makeup today. I'm wearing a black shirt with polka dots and I'm sitting in front of a blue wall. And I'm holding the book, Black Food Matters. So I'm gonna begin things just by actually reading the back of the book to sort of give you a general sense of what the book is about and how we've characterized what the book is about, since we chose what was on the back of the book. So for Black Americans, the food system is broken. When it comes to nutrition, Black consumers experience an unjust and inequitable distribution of resources. Black Food Matters examines these issues through in-depth essays that analyze how Blackness is contested through food, differing ideas of what makes our sustenance healthy, and Black individuals' own beliefs about what their cuisine should be. Primarily written by non-white scholars and framed through a focus on Black agency instead of deprivation, the essays here showcase Black communities fighting for the survival of their food culture. This book takes readers into the real world of Black sustenance, examining animal husbandry practices in South Carolina, the work of the Black Panther Party to ensure food equality, and Black women who are pioneering urban agriculture. These essays also explore individual and community values, the influence of history, and the ongoing struggle to meet needs and affirm Black life. A comprehensive look at Black food culture and the various forms of violence that threaten the future of this cuisine, Black Food Matters centers Blackness in a field that has too often framed Black issues through a white-centric lens, offering new ways to think about access, privilege, equity, and justice. And so I'll turn things over now to my co-editor, Ashante Reese.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ashante Reese. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am a Black woman. I would have medium brown skin, would have been on the cusp of passing the paper brown test. The paper bag test. I'm wearing red lipstick, tortoise framed glasses, and in my background there are two different altars, one for my family, one for related to my current project, and two pieces of art on the wall. So first I want to thank the other folks who are part of our panel here. I know they'll each get a chance to introduce themselves, but we've been working on this collection, and part of what makes it a success is how thoughtful and honestly timely all of the contributors are, including the ones that are here today. So thank you for joining us. So I'll just take a moment to talk a little bit about how this volume came together, and I'll read a little section from the introduction. And this section is called Positionality and the Politics of Studying Black Food Culture. As interest in food justice and the related concept of food sovereignty has grown, so too have questions about methodological, theoretical, and ethical concerns about studying racialized communities that bear the weight of food inequities. Questions of food justice are fundamentally about the production, distribution, and consumption of food. In the process of envisioning a more equitable and sustainable food system, however, we must also contend with the epistemological lenses and frameworks from which we theorize ways forward. Black Food Matters was compiled based on the belief that it is imperative to center Black ways of knowing and being as a place from which to understand not only the constraints produced by anti-Blackness, but the possibilities that Black people innovate and create in the wake of these constraints. We, meaning Hannah and I, developed the ideas for this volume over the course of 2 panels at AAA, the first in Denver in November 2015, and the second in Washington, DC in November 2017. Following these 2 panels in May 2018, we brought together 6 scholars included in this volume to present publicly on our work at the University of California, San Diego, and engaged in a weekend-long writing and thinking workshop. As part of the workshop, we each read each other's chapters, provided feedback on them individually, and then discussed the themes that cut across each of them. While we would have preferred to have all of the contributors to be at this workshop, limited funding meant we had to make strategic decisions. We chose to invite those with whom we had not had an extensive engagement in other venues. We mentioned this workshop here because as we conceptualized this volume, we were intentional and clear that we wanted to model the type of collaborative work that many of us write about, knowing that collaboration is not always easy, nor is it clear-cut. We also wanted to bring together these scholars, the majority of whom identify as Black, to discuss the various tensions and contradictions we see and experience as Black people, mainly writing about other Black people in a field in which most of those who are writing about Black people are not Black. We include this here to call attention to the number and diversity of Black scholars, particularly those who are working from a social science perspective, engaging in food work, and note that other scholars have complicated the notion that one can have automatic or permanent insider status. With this approach, we take up another aspect of William Forson's call for food studies to take intersectionality more seriously. What does that look like when we apply it to research participants and communities, but also turn that lens on ourselves, the ones who are doing the studying? So now we'll hear a little bit from each person who's part of the panel. We'll read just a short excerpt of their chapters, and then we'll go from there.
My name is Judith Williams. I use she, her, and hers pronouns. I'm a Black woman with cocoa-colored skin. I have dreadlocks that are just below my chin. And I'm wearing a multicolored shirt with a lot of bright colors in it, yellows and greens and orange. The backdrop is my Florida room, and there is a view of the backyard, which is quite green and lush. My affiliation, I'm with Florida International University, and I work in critical Black studies, Black foodways, critical race theory, which includes, of course, whiteness and intersectionality. But the main thrust of my work is racial equity. So today I'm going to read a very short section from my chapter called Resistance and the Black Radical Tradition. In the restaurant, we workers use various techniques to resist white dominance. None of these techniques were formally organized per se, but instead, in a weapons of the weak type of scenario, generally involved a slowdown in production, people who disappeared for longer than usual when taking out the trash or cleaning up outside, and a feigned lack of understanding due to linguistic differences. On one occasion, the chef hired a new white prep cook, a transplant, from the Northeast who had taken a job slotted for a relative of one of the Haitian dishwashers. All the dishwashers gave him the cold shoulder and refused to speak English around him. Most of the time, they would pretend they could not understand him. They called him blanc, the Haitian Creole term for white man. They always washed his equipment last, which frustrated him so much that he often ended up washing his own pots and pans. On the white prep cook's last day, he walked out mid-shift after the chef called him an effing incompetent ass for overcooking asparagus in the steamer. The prep cook had been distracted by one of the dishwashers, slowly and inefficiently washing his equipment. The next day, the white prep cook's slot was filled by a young Black Asian man. That's it.
Thank you, Judith. I think we'll have Billy speak next.
Hi, everyone. I just want to start off by thanking Hannah and Ashante for inviting me to be part of this panel. It is really an honor, especially on a historic day where to be presenting and promoting this great volume, Black Food Matters, on a day where Black people are very much responsible for giving us a presidential victory for Joe Biden and a vice presidential victory for Kamala Harris. So it is really an honor. So my name is Billy Hall. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am a white guy. I have dark, short hair, a beard. I wear glasses. I can embarrass myself. I got some bags under my eyes from not getting a lot of sleep lately. And I'm in somewhat of a generic room with a picture in the background of a woman playing a guitar and some curtains. And I'm wearing a kind of mauve collared shirt. Right now, I'm a Science and Technology Policy Fellow with the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And my research focuses on food geographies, urban development, and racial inequality and equity. So just to give a little bit of context for the passage that I'll read, it comes from a chapter that examines how Black food culture has been identified as a cultural asset that can be marketed for racial heritage tourism, and how this particular kind of redevelopment is undermining existing Black food geographies. Luis Castillo, a Dominican man who's run a meat market and grocery for nearly 20 years, worries about his long-term prospects in Overtown. When I ask Castillo how he has managed to stay in business over the years, he tells me that in addition to supplying meat and produce for some of the neighborhood restaurants, he's learned to stock his store with goods specific to the needs and preferences of residents, including various kinds and cuts of meat, fresh fruit and vegetables, and other items like made-to-order sandwiches, work shirts, and hair products. Sometimes Castillo tells me if a customer is unable to afford a needed good, he'll often give it to them for free, which has earned him the reputation of caring and providing for the Overtown community rather than simply profiting from it. And as we talk further, it becomes apparent that Castillo has also helped facilitate the intergenerational sustainability of cultural food practices by learning to prepare some of his customers' favorite dishes and passing the knowledge onto younger residents. He explains, in the past 5 to 7 years, we've lost a lot of older people. So we're getting the daughter, the grandkid coming and buying the same items that their grandma usually comes in to buy. And some of them will ask me how they will cook certain things, like how do you cook the collard greens, lima beans, oxtail. They're young people. They look at the mom or at the grandma, but they didn't really pay attention to it. And now they have to do it. So lately I've been getting a little more involved in how to prepare certain things. Like I said, it's a lot of young kids, so they haven't passed through them how to cook it. They've seen it, they want to cook it, it's part of the tradition, so they want to do it. But while responding to the needs of longtime residents has been crucial for staying in business, Castillo's future in Overtown grows increasingly precarious in the midst of neighborhood change. For one, he does not own the property where his grocery is located and is at risk of increasing rents or the threat of building demolition. And like many other businesses in the area, although he's been established in the community for decades, his store does not evoke the narrative of heritage deployed to attract tourism, and thus falls outside the Community Redevelopment Agency's vision for investing in local economic development. Many of Overtown's small food business owners are marginalized by a vision of heritage that celebrates Black cultural achievement during Jim Crow, while ignoring, silencing, and erasing a more recent history of struggle in the wake of urban renewal, economic decline, and institutional neglect. Because most of the people working and living in Overtown today were never alive or present to witness the so-called heydays inspiring today's local tourism and hospitality development, their histories, lived experiences, notions of community, and claims to place are, quote, rendered ungeographic, to quote Catherine McKittrick, by a redevelopment vision ironically predicated on local Black histories. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Billy. I think we'll have Jillian speak next.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jillian Richards-Greaves. The pronouns associated with me are she, her, and hers. I'm a Black woman, and I'm currently wearing a floral dress with a Black blazer, and my hair is in a bun, a dreadlock bun, and I have red glasses. My background is of an African woman carrying a pot or something on her head. My affiliation is Coastal Carolina University. I'm in the Department of Anthropology and Geography. My areas of interest include the musical, cultural, and linguistic and ritual expressions of the African diaspora, particularly of the English-speaking Caribbean. I also focus on the cultural intersections of Africa, the Caribbean, and the Gullah Geechee people of the Southern United States. My chapter is the intersections of politics and food security in a South Carolina town, and I focus on the area of, or the town of Cool Spring, South Carolina. I'll be reading from the section called Food Justice and Self-Defense. For many Black residents of Cool Spring, food is encoded with economic and sociopolitical messages about their perceptions of the United States and their continued survival. Many of these residents are old enough to have experienced sharecropping, Jim Crow, and other neo-slavery systems in the United States, and many recount narratives of food scarcity transmitted by foreparents as a way of reminding themselves to continue to, quote, work the land. Over the past few years, horticulture and animal husbandry have become active strategies for ethnic boundary maintenance and protection for many Black Cool Spring residents. The subsistence strategy is not a new concept in the Black community, but due to recent political developments in the United States, it has taken on renewed importance, particularly in farming communities like Cool Spring. Those who actively farm have begun doing so with renewed fervency in response to what they regard as political incorrectness, which they view as detrimental to their continued safety and security, particularly their ability to sustain themselves. Black Cool Spring residents' fear of an impending civil war is often exacerbated by fears of all-encompassing World War III. Their concern was particularly heightened when President Trump and North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un began trading insults, and some lamented that, quote, Trump is gonna get us killed, end quote. Black residents' dis-ease increased further when President Trump began breaking alliances with allies, canceling international agreements, and forming friendships with geopolitical foes. Among themselves, they reasoned that a third world war would impose difficulties on the Black community, and particularly on their ability to feed themselves. Moreover, a third world war would expose the entire country, and specifically the Black community, to the increased possibility of agro-terrorism, the, quote, biological attacks against a nation's food supply, end quote. Thus, while they may not be able to resist a military draft or other international calamities brought on by elected officials, many regard food production as a means of remaining independent of overarching political systems in the United States of America.
Thank you, Jillian. Ashante, do you want to go ahead with your chapter section?
Yeah, yes, I could do that. Jillian, I was just thinking the section you read, I was with a community garden this morning and one of the elders was talking about this kind of impending future where the only survive are those who can grow our own food. So I'm gonna make sure she reads your chapter. Okay, I'm gonna read from a section that is called Black Entrepreneurship in Contemporary Context, Danny's Ice Cream Turned Food Truck. And the title of my chapter is called In the Food Justice World, But Not of It, Everyday Black Food Entrepreneurship. Almost everything about it signaled ice cream truck. Its location in front of the recreation center where Pee Wee football was happening, its boxy shape, the window opening through which a man served each person standing in line. However, each ice cream photo on the outside of the truck was marked out with a giant black X. I stepped up to talk to a second man who sat in the driver's seat. We exchanged names and I gave the customary spiel. I'm a researcher studying food and community in the neighborhood. Danny pulled black gloves from a box, commenting that he always used a fresh pair before serving someone. I had to wonder if the performance of drawing the fresh pair of gloves, if the decision to serve me through the truck's front door rather than let me wait in line with the others, had anything to do with my researcher identity. So while others stood in line, waiting to be served by the man at the window, Danny gave me VIP service, fixing up 2 half smokes with chili and cheese for less than $7. Sometimes described as a cross between a hot dog and a sausage, a half smoke is a staple in Black neighborhoods in DC. Like mambo sauce, an elusive condiment made of ketchup, barbecue sauce, hot sauce, and other ingredients, half smokes serve as a barometer of authenticity. Recognizing them signals that you know something about the quote, real DC. I had heard about this truck prior to my first visit. A research participant described Danny as the local ice cream man who sold chips, ice cream, hot foods, and noodles. Speaking to Danny's flexibility, he continued on to say that he also provided food for parties and church events and made deliveries. In the fall, he parked at the recreation center to sell snacks and nachos during the flag football games. The only thing he did not sell, the participant lamented, was chicken wings and fries, the perfect accompaniment for mambo sauce.
Great, thank you. I will just read a little bit from my chapter and then we will have a little bit of a discussion among the panelists and then open things up for Q&A with the audience. But if you're audience members and you already have burning questions, you can start putting those into the Q&A section rather than putting them into the chat. Thank you. So my chapter opens with the following passage. In the fall of 2010, I joined David and Cheryl to speak at a high school class in East Los Angeles. I had been working with them as both a volunteer for their organization, Bettering Life, and as an ethnographer studying Los Angeles-based organizations with the mission to increase healthy food among residents in South LA and East LA, predominantly Black and Latinx respectively. Their organization had the goal of improving access to healthy food in South LA by targeting high school students and engaging them in community development projects, such as corner store conversions that introduce fresh fruits and vegetables to existing corner stores and liquor stores in the area. We met near where we live. We both live in the same neighborhood in Los Angeles. David identified as white, Cheryl as East Asian, I identify as Black. On this particular day, we were visiting a local high school where they had been invited to do a year-long full curriculum of bi-weekly workshops on healthy eating with the students. Although healthy was not explicitly defined by this organization, the implication was that fresh fruits and vegetables were the kinds of healthy foods that people should be eating. And as part of these programs, students would design and implement projects to improve food access in their local communities. To begin, David and Cheryl asked everyone to introduce themselves and tell the group what their favorite food was. I jotted down the students' responses: tamales, barbecue ribs, pozole, pizza, carne asada, and tortillas and butter. When it came around to me, I stated my name and that my favorite food was macaroni and cheese. Cheryl introduced herself after me and spoke at length about her love of Brussels sprouts, which I also love to eat when they are well prepared. At the end of the session, after we left the classroom, Cheryl pulled me aside and said, quote, "I wanted to talk to you about your favorite food. We're here to get the kids to change the way that they eat, to get them to stop eating things like tortillas or macaroni and cheese and eat things like Brussels sprouts, kale, broccoli, healthy food. So next time, say that you like kale, okay?" So that's just one example of the various research that I've done with food justice organizations across Los Angeles. And in this chapter, I think about how organizations are thinking about the concept of justice and the concept of healthy eating as it relates to race and forms of anti-Blackness in the work that they do. So I will stop there and we'll open it up for some discussion among the panelists.
Hannah, I can never read or hear you talk about that experience and not shake my head, right? And I was thinking as you were talking, I was thinking about one of the things that I've been reflecting on about our work in food studies is how do we draw that line between the reality that like maybe there are some things that we can do differently on an individual level while also communicating that to control a narrative about food as a hegemonic process that can be rooted in anti-Blackness and a whole bunch of other things. And that I feel like you're when I read that passage from you, that's exactly what I think about, how difficult it is to untangle, even though we critique it in these spaces, like that is not an individual problem, it's not an individual, but it's so difficult to detangle that narrative, a larger narrative around health and healthiness that is largely like, yeah, it's a hegemonic one. And as I was saying to some people last night, often disingenuous. It doesn't always feel like it's about health and healthiness, but around an aesthetic, particularly a certain kind of food and eating and body aesthetic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to reference or to kind of talk about how, just switching a bit, how the coronavirus, since writing my chapter, how the coronavirus has compounded the angst in the Black community concerning food sovereignty and food security, because since the spring when we went on lockdown, pretty much when all the schools went virtual, I realized that there was this increased activity in the Black community, specifically in Cool Spring, where I continue to work along with my consultants, friends, and stuff like that. And it's quite interesting because for a long time, even I myself kept saying, "Yeah, I'm gonna plant," because I love doing that. I grew up doing that. But with coronavirus, planting was not just about food security and food sovereignty, it was about sanity. And so it took on a different level of urgency. It's like we need to be sane. So we need to be in the dirt, get in the dirt. And it's quite interesting because all of the stuff that I was putting off doing concerning food, producing my own food, I just started doing it. And I'm like, so I started with the raised beds. I used large boxes and things like that. And the primary consultant that I worked with for this chapter, she and I got together and started raising chickens. And we have over 70 chickens like ready to go. And so we've been doing this since the spring, but it was quite interesting that what they were talking about, you heard them say, see, this is what we were talking about. This is it. And they were convinced that this coronavirus is biological warfare. They could not see it as anything else and say, this is what, see those who, and you mentioned something that the older woman you were talking about said, that those who can produce their own food will be the ones who will survive. And that is exactly what they kept saying. They were even gloating, like, let's see what they're gonna do now. I have my shotgun and I can protect my farm. Let them come and try to like steal from me. But that was something that I found quite interesting. So it's no longer about feeding yourself and being able to secure your food source, but it's about just staying sane with all that's going on in the world.
I wonder if other people have reflections on how the pandemic, well, I would say the pandemic and the summer uprisings and protests have impacted either how you're thinking about your own work or impacted the communities where you've done work.
I was always yelled at by my consultant because she said, she would always say, you with this camera, put it down and come and pull up some scallion or something. And so what I found myself doing was literally now, like, here, let's put this on a tripod, because from like, I just needed to feel the dirt. And so it was now no longer about observation, but more about participant observation. Like there's an urgency where agriculture and participant observation is concerned. And so it's and so before I would purchase chicken from her, this is my way of supporting, but now I'm actually actively doing it because this is actually how I was raised, and this is my normal side, producing my own food. So it's changed my work a lot from observation to participant observation. Like, this is earnest, you must get this done. So
I can offer something that I found interesting. So, so in Overtown, where which is where the chapter is based on, Marcus Samuelson, who's a celebrity chef, was about to open a restaurant in March, the month that sort of COVID kind of really broke out across the states, and so the restaurant itself did not formally open. I think they opened a part of it, and but it wasn't able to be fully operational, and I think still is not open yet. And to me, it you know, on the one hand, it revealed how vulnerable this model of development can be to external crises, where, you know, the public funds have been invested into this development group coming in and bringing this restaurant that is promoting, you know, is kind of operating under the idea that it's going to bring jobs to the area, and how all of these people had been trained up until March, and then were no longer had a job because the restaurant wasn't able to open. And so just thinking of like how this was, you know, so geared towards promoting tourism in the area, and something like COVID, you know, throws a wrench into that, and that investment could have, you know, been used in a way that that invested in the community for folks who were, you know, had to be in, you know, who live in this neighborhood and were, you know, have to be there during COVID. Whereas, you know, during the pandemic, people are not going to be going to this restaurant because, well, restaurants are either closed or they don't want to, you know, health reasons and whatnot. And so thinking about the ways that certain models of development rely on affluent folks to come in and, you know, and you know, consume, how these models really have broken down in light of this. But as a counterexample, there's an interesting story of a hotel that is it's a Black-owned hotel, and it's really interesting. Each room is kind of themed around a different Black historical figure, and they were also getting ready to open, and they weren't getting any tourism, but they were able to negotiate a deal with the city to house homeless people. And so the city was paying them to you know, keep them housed and in these really wonderful rooms. And so thinking about the ways in which you know, Black people are really creative and entrepreneurial in supporting the lives of Black people, of poor people, when there is a crisis, I think is a really interesting counterpoint to how public funds can be invested, and to think about long-term sustainability in the face of inevitable crises. You know, what are the ways that we can invest in local businesses so that they are set up to be resilient, to provide safety nets for those in need.
I wanted to add to the conversation as well. So my chapter for this book looks at 4 chefs here in Miami called the Mango Gang, and they are all white men. And I talk about how they created this cuisine called New World Cuisine. And the main chef, the one that created this cuisine, his name is Norman Van Aken. And like many other restaurants here in South Florida, his is also closed right now. One of the things that I talk about is white authority, this invisible white authority that comes to light throughout the chapter. So Norman has a 2-minute radio program on Saturday mornings. And speaking about race, this morning I heard him on the radio, and he was talking about where he talks about different foods and the origin of these foods. And for the first time, he talked about moros y cristianos, which is rice and beans. And he was talking about the fact that it represented Blackness and whiteness. And I found it interesting that he was bringing race into the conversation for the first time that I've heard him talk about race in 30 years. And I think it's a reflection of this moment that we are in right now, where we're starting to look at the way in which race and racial equity is played out in the food service industry. So I wanted to contribute that thought to the conversation.
That reminds me, Judith, something that kind of connects a little bit what you and Billy were talking about. Billy, when you were talking about Marcus Samuelsson, I was thinking about how he just has this new book out, The Rise, that's celebrating Black cooks and soul food. And I was also thinking about what does it mean to be in a position where you have several streams of income, or in this case, and this is totally not a dig against Marcus Samuelsson, but when you're been positioned as the person to get the spotlight of the moment, like he's a person of the moment in this regard. And so I was thinking about that. And then Judith, you said you were talking about there's a moment where people are paying attention and grappling and talking about these things. Bon Appetit, Southern Foodways Alliance, all these, different media and organizations having these crises moments over the summer and trying to figure out and grapple with not just race, but racism, and thinking about leadership and power. And it made me wonder, it's not the question of why now, right? Like why go on your radio station now and use your 2-minute segment, but it's always the question of to what end, right? Like, and this pushes me to this kind of other question, and I don't know if any folks, I know we had a script, y'all, but now I'm listening to people and I have all these thoughts. But where's the reparative? What's the role of the reparative, right? Like, what's the role of, like, for someone when cultural appropriation happens, can there be repair? I don't know. I'm just throwing this out there for like maybe future discussion.
That's an interesting question, Ashante. I was wondering to myself this morning if Norman had read my chapter and this was some sort of mea culpa in a way, in terms of
mail him a book. We can mail him a book, yeah, with an invoice because he needs to pay for it.
Well, I think, yeah, I don't know, in terms of repairing the damage that has been done and creating a food service industry, a restaurant industry that is more equitable racially. I don't know if it's possible at this point. I know people are trying, but it just seems that we're so far apart, and COVID has just made everything so much worse than it actually has been.
I think also coronavirus has also given us a chance to pay attention to what's happening, because I know that there are several businesses that use the term Gullah, like Gullah cooking, Gullah whatever, and they had nothing to do with Gullah people or Black people at all. And so the Gullah community, the Cultural Heritage Quarter Commission, and different Gullah organizations put a lot of pressure on them, and they're, some are actually removing the label and stuff like that. So I think that's, in a small way, one way to have some kind of repair, um, if just to the image or to what to be, or to the practices, that helps. Because then what happens when they remove the label, they can no longer use it, then the people who actually create those foods can then sort of reclaim that label, and to have a voice in what is really Gullah cooking or Gullah foods, or, Gullah identity broadly construed.
I want to pick up on that and say, so one of the things that the organizations that I work with for, since their inception, they've conceptualized their work as being reparative. They think of themselves as doing justice to make the food system more equitable. The problem that many of them have is that they do not include community members in their conceptualizations of their work, or in thinking through whether they should be doing the work at all. So thinking about, like, maybe the restaurants that put a Gullah label on their menu think that they're somehow being helpful, but that actually they're creating more harm by not going through the rigor and the depth that they need to go through to be able to understand what the problems are and how any outsiders could help with solving some of the problems. So what people often conceptualize as reparative actually does more damage.
I had a minister that used to say they're sincere, but they're sincerely wrong, right? Because they meant to do good, but it just, it's from a limited scope. So it does more harm.
I think there's been, with the rise of a lot of, food shows, Food Network and all this, there's been this propagation of the idea that food is meant for everyone and everyone can borrow at will from anyone else's culture. And that's really tricky because, and I think Black food studies really helps to illuminate when something is more than borrowing, when something is actually more like appropriation and stealing, because it helps to show the struggle behind food and who, who has authorship over certain kinds of food. And we don't have, intellectual property laws that draw these distinctions. Not that I'm necessarily advocating for something like that, but I think Black food studies, one of the remarkable things about it is that it really drives home that sense of ownership and the erasure of that ownership over time, such that when people think that we're just borrowing things, it is actually a form of racism if you are able to extract culture from someone else and accumulate a profit in doing so at the expense of someone who that is their livelihood, or that is their history, or that is their culture, and they are not in a position to be able to kind of mobilize their talents in the same way. So I think there needs to be an acknowledgement that it is appropriation in the first place, and that the way that we are talking about it is not that we are sharing and borrowing and exchanging in this level playing field.
Yeah, I think also beyond sharing and borrowing and appropriation, even appropriation, I think sometimes the insult to injury, for lack of a better phrase, is when the people borrowing, let's use the term borrowing, decide that, oh, look what I've created. I've innovated this wonderful thing. And that's where I think the erasure comes in, because it's like, I like to call it like the Columbus syndrome. You act, you act as though this never existed before me. And I think sometimes that compounds the injury that's done from the appropriation and, you know, the erasure.
Yeah, Jillian, in South Florida, that is compounded by the insult of paying people, appropriating their food and their culinary traditions, but then appropriating also their labor and paying them pennies so they cannot live, you know. So.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, Judith. That's something that Ashanti and I read about in the introduction as having a long history where a lot of the culinary traditions of the United States are based on the appropriation of Black knowledge and Black labor. So I think I'll use that to sort of transition into answering the first question that's in the Q&A, which was asked by Ryan Adams. The question is, how wonderful to hear these fascinating projects and exciting news about the new book. Thank you. Can you share a little more about some of the other research projects featured in the book beyond those featured in the passages read here today? So I guess I'll go ahead and answer that. Ashanti and I write an introduction, which I personally think is a really good introduction. And then the next chapter that was from someone not included here is from Annalena Hope Hasberg, which is about the Black Panther Party and its chapter in Los Angeles and the work that it did to basically start the beginnings of a Black food justice movement. She bases the work here in Los Angeles, but the Panther Party did it all over the United States. And then chapter 5 is by Andrew Newman and Yusan Young, and it's Good Food in the Racist System, Competing Moral Economies in Detroit. So it's a really important chapter that goes over all of the things that are happening in Detroit with some of the long-term issues of food apartheid there, and then attempts to shift that. I think they also write about the Whole Foods that was built in Detroit in the midst of all of this sort of controversy over food apartheid. And then Kimberly Casper's chapter is on barbecue in Memphis, and it goes over a long history of Tennessee-based barbecue, and it connects to other forms of whole hog barbecue, mostly pork-related barbecue. Thinking about the Black roots of barbecue and how they are sometimes appropriated by white folks and sometimes appreciated by white folks. The volume includes Monica White's chapter, Sisters of the Soil, which focuses also on Detroit, on urban agriculture movements there. We have a chapter called Race, Land, and the Law, Black Farmers and the Limits of the Politics of Recognition by Billy Wright, Tyler McCreary, Brian Williams, and Adam Bledsoe. And that chapter talks about Black land tenure and the role of the USDA and other federal organizations in systematically depriving Black farmers of their rights to retain their land. And then the afterword is really important. It's by Psyche Williams-Forson, and Psyche kind of brings together all of the ways in which we're conceptualizing Black foodways and food justice in the volume in a very nice and very short piece to wrap it all up.
Can I just add a couple of things to what you said, Hannah? One, I was thinking about what you mentioned about repair, and in answer to the question, I think in particular, the chapter on race, land, and law, and then the chapter on good food in a racist system, they don't frame it this way, but they are also kind of critiques of like the kinds of repair like the USDA or some organizations in Detroit have tried to engage, right, and try to center particularly the race, land, and the law chapter, I think is really important for those of you who are listening and interested in questions around land, because they're not so much getting into the history of the USDA as much as what accepting a settlement from the USDA meant, and as like harm reduction, but the limits of that kind of recognition, right? And I think it felt really powerful. And the last thing, we didn't say this, and I feel like it's such an important part of the volume, is that we were trying to think about also what a volume would look like with a lot of representation and maybe over-representation of the South, because of how many food justice volumes have a lot of representation or over-representation of California for good reason, or other parts of the US. And so I feel really proud that we have so many chapters that focus on Southern states. I mean, could be because I'm Southern also. I think it's important theoretically to think about, especially since our volume is framed with questions of really attending to what does it mean to be doing work on food in the afterlife of slavery, right? And like, you cannot leave the South out of that conversation. So.
Okay, I'll read the other question in the chat and also let participants know that you can definitely put some more questions in the Q&A if you would like. This one is from Kira Rib. Thank you so much for taking the time and energy to come into conversation with all of us today. I have a question overlapping comments from Hannah, Jillian, and Ashante's comments on healthism, food sovereignty, and agriculture. How does participation in agriculture as a food sovereignty practice shape Black narratives around health? And how is this distinct from white supremacist aesthetic healthism?
Well, I'll take a little bit of a stab of it at this, because I feel like I was talking about this in another venue last night. And I think part of the question is about framing. And in this book, and I think a lot of our different works, the questions aren't driven by questions of access, right? Because I think that there's a limit to thinking about access and what that means. And they're not necessarily even driven by questions of health. Most of the chapters, or many of the chapters, are questions around what does it mean to be, for Black people to be self-determining in a certain kind of way. And in the chapter around moral economies, competing moral economies in Detroit, for example, they really go into this idea that for many of the folks they were working with, it wasn't about this kind of individual body as much as a body. And I think that felt really important, that they were thinking about what does it mean to take care of the self vis-a-vis my relationship to the community, or what does it mean for me to take care of myself so that I can be of service and embedded and enmeshed in community. The other thing I was thinking about, I immediately thought of Julie Guthman's description and critique of healthism and healthyism, and I just want to kind of bring us back to its connections to capitalism and to people. And I think that and being healthy workers and being healthy enough to serve in a worker capacity or in a military capacity. And I want to say that at least in my own work, that never comes up in people's discussions. Like there's this desire to, and actually the emphasis is on feeling good in a lot of what I have experienced. Feeling good as in like, I am trying to eat better because I'm responding to something that is happening in my body and not a particular aesthetic. And I'm not saying that Black people don't want to look a certain way like that, but just in terms of in the research context, that's what I hear more of. And I think that feels like a distinction. And then I also think that there's a distinction here that's important when it feels like, and it is also true in some cases where Black people are still fighting to be sovereign just over individual bodies, right? So like to be able to decide, use urban agriculture and growing one's own food, choosing what you eat as a practice of sovereignty, I think is also a critique of the state. And it's a critique of anti-Blackness, and it's rooted in something else that isn't necessarily about aesthetics.
Yeah, I agree. Because what I also observed, it was not about looking a certain way. right? It was about planting or engaging in agriculture so we can own ourselves. So we don't, in the case of a war or civil unrest, we don't have to go wait on lines and possibly wait on the same people to give us food, right? Foods that may harm us. And so many of the folks I work with, they are keenly, uniquely aware of the diabetes and other kinds of health issues that plague the community, and partly because of this government issued goods, or the government cheese or whatever it is they would have gotten in the past. They're also aware of what was done in the past to sort of to break them or bend them into the mold of what political officials wanted, because they were at the mercies of those folks. So when I think of health, they're thinking about being able to eat what I want, cook what I want, and even thinking of health from a perspective of getting exercise from farming, like going out there and working the land. I'm not sitting all day. So it's a more comprehensive view of health that takes not just the individual, as you said, into consideration, but the larger community. We're healthy because we can eat good, and good means food that's from the land to the table, from farm to table.
Yeah, one of the things that the organizations that I work with often, they use the food pyramid or other USDA food guides in their conceptualization of what is healthy. And they sort of take that to be the end all be all of what healthy is. And I think it's hard for a lot of members of the Black community to take that up when organizations like the USDA are the perpetrators of harm in the community, which ties to the chapter on race, law, and the land. So nutrition is something that people think of critically. Like, we've been told different things from nutritionists over the last 50 years. First, they said low fat was good, and now they're saying it's good to have healthy fats. And so it's a science that is seen as flawed and possibly not trustworthy by many of the community members, but it's not something that the organizations that I work with view critically. So I'll just say we have like 3 minutes left, and when this session ends, we can go into the hallway, and the link to the hallway has been put into the chat. So if folks want to join us in the hallway for some conversation, we'll be there. Do we have any final comments from us?
I'll just offer one more question, which is, I was reflecting on some of the organizations that I get a chance to know, and it just dawned on me that many of them were not necessarily founded just to respond to food issues. And thinking about the Black Church Food Security Network in Baltimore, that one comes to mind almost immediately, because that was founded in the wake of Freddie Gray being murdered in 2015. And it was in response to the fact that Black neighborhoods were being cut off from having access to a number of different kinds of services. And so Pastor Brown started driving around food to people in the community in his truck. And from that birthed something else. So I guess I want to just say that part of it is that the thing that births some of these food movements is a broader racial terror that isn't about food.
Yes.
So. I'm just checking the chat. Thank you to the few people that have put comments in the chat.
Yes, thank you. They're gonna kick us out in 1 minute. So thank you all for being here. And I'll try to read this last question. Like Ashley, I don't have a specific question. Thank you so much for this intersectional approach to all these important and exciting things. I can't wait to read the edition. That's a good way to end things.
Don't forget to click the link in the chat if you're trying to hop over to the next thing, and we'll pop over soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.